I still remember the look on Walter's face when I stood up at that board meeting. After 40 years of marriage, after he'd left me for a woman half my age, after he'd told me I was just a housewife who wouldn't understand business. The moment. When I revealed I owned 67% of Reynolds Custom Furniture was worth every second of the decades I spent in his shadow. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never thought I'd be telling my story to millions of people. For most of my 61 years, I was just Barbara Reynolds, Walter's wife, Michael's mother, Grace's grandmother. The woman who made the perfect pot roast every Sunday and remembered everyone's birthdays with handwritten cards, the reliable one, the constant one, the invisible one. Walter and I met when I was just 20. He was handsome, ambitious, and 5 years older than me. I still remember how he looked in that navy blue suit when he came to pick me up for our first date, like he already owned the world. My father, a practical man who valued security above all else, approved immediately. That young man's going places, he'd said, nodding with satisfaction. What my father didn't know was that I had already inherited a substantial sum from my maternal grandfather when I turned 18. It wasn't a fortune by today's standards, but in the late 1970s, it was enough to start something significant. My Uncle Thomas, who had always treated me more like a daughter than a niece, had been guiding me in how to invest it. "Don't tell the boys about this," he'd whisper conspiratorially. "They always think they know better what to do with a woman's money." So when Walter proposed after just 6 months of dating, I said yes without mentioning my inheritance. It wasn't that I didn't trust him. I just followed Uncle Thomas's advice to keep some things separate, just in case. That just in case would take 40 years to materialize, but I'm grateful now for my uncle's foresight. We started Reynolds Custom Furniture together in our 3rd year of marriage, though the world saw it differently. Walter was the face of the company, charming clients, presenting at trade shows, making deals. I was technically the office manager, but in reality, I did everything from bookkeeping to design consultations to hiring. And unknown to Walter, the initial capital came mostly from my inheritance, with the company registered primarily in my name, another suggestion from Uncle Thomas, who helped with the paperwork. "It's a good tax strategy," he assured Walter, who was too excited about being CEO to question the details. "Barbara will handle the boring paperwork. You focus on growth." And so our roles were established early on. Walter took the credit, I did the work. Our son Michael was born in our 5th year of marriage. I cut back my hours at the office but never really stopped working. I'd put Michael down for his nap and then review financials or call suppliers with him sleeping beside me. As he grew, older and started school, I expanded my hours again, though always making sure I was home before Walter returned. "A man needs to come home to a peaceful house and a hot meal," my mother had instructed me. "That's the secret to a happy marriage." So I maintained 2 full-time jobs, running our growing business behind the scenes and maintaining our home as if that was my only occupation. The years passed in a blur of school events, business expansions, holiday dinners, and trade shows. We moved from our starter home to a beautiful brick 2-story in Maple Grove, an upper-middle-class suburb outside Philadelphia. Walter's ego grew alongside our business success. With each passing year, his version of our story shifted further from reality. In his telling, he had single-handedly built Reynolds Custom Furniture from nothing, through sheer will and business savvy. "My wife? Oh, Barbara keeps the books," he'd say dismissively at industry events, as if I were a part-time bookkeeper rather than the co-founder who made most of the strategic decisions. I never corrected him. I was raised to believe that a good wife supports her husband's image in public. Besides, I told myself, what did it matter who got the credit as long as our family was thriving? Michael grew up watching this dynamic and, not surprisingly, adopted his father's worldview. He saw me as just Mom, the woman who packed his lunches and washed his soccer uniform, not as a businesswoman who helped build a multi-million-dollar company. When he joined the business after college, he naturally gravitated toward Walter for mentorship, seeing him as the business genius of the family. The first real crack in my marriage appeared when Walter hired Heather Collins as his executive assistant. She was 34, with sleek black hair and an MBA from Wharton that she mentioned in every conversation. I noticed immediately how Walter straightened. His tie whenever she walked into the room, how his laugh became just a touch more animated when she was present. "She's just very efficient," Walter said defensively when I casually mentioned she seemed very young for such a senior position. "The business is growing. I need someone who can keep up." The business was indeed growing. What had started as a small custom furniture workshop had expanded into a respected brand with showrooms in 3 states. We specialized in high-end, heirloom-quality pieces that blended traditional craftsmanship with contemporary design. Each piece was handcrafted by skilled artisans we'd personally trained, many of whom had been with us for decades. I managed our finances conservatively, ensuring we expanded only when we could do so without taking on excessive debt. Walter, ever the risk-taker, would have grown faster, but he usually deferred to my cautiousness, since it had served us well. What he didn't know was that I had been quietly acquiring additional shares in the company whenever possible, reinvesting my portion of the profits while he spent his on-status symbols: a boat, a vacation home in Lake Harmony that we rarely used, a collection of vintage cars. On our 40th anniversary, Walter gave me a diamond necklace. It was beautiful, certainly expensive, and completely impersonal. He could have given the same necklace to any woman. There was nothing in it that reflected 4 decades of shared life, nothing that said it was chosen specifically for me. "Do you like it?" he asked, already checking his phone for messages. "It's lovely," I replied, and it was. But as I fastened it around my neck, I realized I couldn't recall the last time Walter had really seen me. Not as his wife, his cook, his social secretary, but as Barbara, the woman with her own thoughts and dreams. That night, as Walter slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this sense of invisibility was just the inevitable outcome of a long marriage, or if somewhere along the way, I had made a crucial mistake in how I'd structured my life. The answer came sooner than I expected. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home early from visiting my friend Patty. She'd been going through a difficult divorce, and I'd been supporting her through it, secretly grateful that, despite its imperfections, my own marriage was stable. Or so, I thought. I heard voices from our home office, Walter's deep baritone and a lighter feminine tone. I wasn't suspicious. Walter often brought work home, and it wasn't unusual for him to have meetings there. I was about to call out and announce my presence when I heard Walter say, "I can't keep living this lie, Heather. Barbara's a good woman, but there's no passion, no understanding. You challenge me in ways she never could." I froze in the hallway, my hand clutching the handle of my purse so tightly that later I would find the imprint of my fingers on the leather. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What about the business?" Heather asked. "She's been involved since the beginning." Walter's laugh was dismissive. "Involved? She keeps the books and orders lunch. The real business decisions have always been mine. She wouldn't know how to run things if I left." "And your son? What will Michael think?" Heather's voice held concern, but not enough to be refusing whatever Walter was proposing. "Michael's an adult with his own family. He'll understand that people grow apart. Besides, he knows who built this company. His future is secure regardless of what happens between Barbara and me." I backed away silently, retreating to my car where I sat for nearly an hour, hands trembling on the steering wheel. 40 years of marriage, and this was how Walter saw me, as nothing more than a glorified secretary who wouldn't understand business. The fury came first, a white-hot rage that made me want to storm back into the house and throw Walter's precious golf trophies through the window. But close behind came a cold, clarifying anger that was far more useful. For 4 decades, I had hidden my business acumen to protect Walter's ego. I had allowed him to believe he was the sole architect of our success. I had made myself smaller to make him feel bigger. No more. I drove to the office and used my key to enter the quiet building. Most employees had gone home for the day, which suited me perfectly. I went straight to my office, smaller than Walter's. Of course, tucked away in the corner as if I were any other employee rather than the majority shareholder. From my locked filing cabinet, I retrieved the documents Uncle Thomas had helped me prepare over the years. The original incorporation papers showing my 67% ownership, the stock certificates, the amendments that kept my controlling interest intact even as we brought on minor investors. I'd never wanted to use these as leverage. They had simply been my safety net, my just in case. Well, just in case had arrived. I made copies of everything, then drove to see Uncle Thomas. At 72, he had retired from active business but had kept his sharp mind and even sharper wit. He listened without interruption as I relayed what I'd overheard, his bushy eyebrows drawing together in a thunderous frown. "I always hoped you'd never need those papers," he said finally. "But I'm glad we had the foresight to put them in place. What do you want to do now, Barbara?" It was the first time in decades anyone had asked what I wanted. "I want to take back my company," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "And I want Walter to know exactly who he's been dismissing all these years." Uncle Thomas nodded slowly. "It won't be easy. Walter's built his entire identity around being the business genius. He'll fight back." "Let him," I said, a new resolve hardening within me. "I've been fighting silently for 40 years. I'm ready to do it openly now." That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a hotel and sent Walter a text saying I was staying with Patty, who immediately agreed to corroborate my story if needed. I spent the night making lists of loyal employees who might stand with me, of clients who knew my contributions, of financial details I would need to review. For the first time in my adult life, I was planning something significant without considering Walter's feelings or ego. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. The next morning, I called our family lawyer, only to discover he considered himself Walter's lawyer. Of course he did. I hung up and contacted Samantha Torres instead, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney I'd met through a women's business network, but had never hired, precisely because Walter found her too aggressive. Today, too aggressive sounded perfect. Samantha met me at her office within the hour. As I laid out my situation and documentation, her professional demeanor gave way to a slow, appreciative smile. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, reviewing the ownership papers, "you are in a remarkably strong position. Your husband has been operating under a significant misapprehension about who actually controls Reynolds Custom Furniture." "Call me Barbara," I said. And yes, that's an understated way to put it. "Barbara," she corrected herself. "Before we proceed, I need to ask, what's your goal here? Do you want to remove your husband from the company? Force a sale? Negotiate a settlement?" I considered the question carefully. Despite everything, I didn't hate Walter. 40 years together creates a bond that doesn't dissolve in a day, even with betrayal. But I couldn't continue in the shadows, either. "I want recognition for what I've built," I said finally. "I want Walter to acknowledge my role publicly. And I want control, real, acknowledged control, of the company's future direction." Samantha nodded, making notes. "And your son? Michael works in the business too, correct?" "Yes. He's vice president of sales." My heart twisted at the thought of Michael. He worshipped his father, emulated his management style, believed wholeheartedly in the myth of Walter the business titan. This would shatter that image. He won't take this well, I admitted. He's very much his father's son. Family businesses are always complicated, Samantha said diplomatically. But ultimately, this is about correcting a long-standing misrepresentation of the company's actual leadership structure. We spent the next 3 hours crafting a strategy. I would continue working as usual for the next week, gathering information and securing digital copies of all essential business records. Samantha would prepare the legal documentation necessary to formally assert my controlling interest. And then we would call a board meeting, officially through proper channels, where I would reveal the truth. "Won't Walter be able to cancel the meeting?" I asked. Samantha's smile was razor sharp. "As majority shareholder, you're the one with the power to call mandatory board meetings. He can't cancel what he doesn't control." It was strange, after decades of playing small, to be reminded of the power I actually held. I left Samantha's office with a curious mixture of dread and anticipation. The next week would be the most challenging performance of my life, acting as if nothing had changed while preparing to change everything. When I finally went home that evening, Walter was waiting, his face a careful mask of concern. "Where were you last night?" I tried calling Patty, but she didn't pick up. The lie came easily. She was having a rough time. We turned our phones off and had a girls' night in. I moved past him toward the stairs. "I'm tired, Walter. I think I'll turn in early." He caught my arm, his grip just tight enough to stop me. "Is everything okay, Barb? You seem different." For a moment, I almost faltered. This was the man I'd built a life with, the father of my child, my partner of 4 decades. But then I remembered his words. "She keeps the books and orders lunch." "Everything's fine," I said, gently removing his hand from my arm, just tired from helping Patty through this rough patch. Walter nodded, accepting my explanation without further question. Why wouldn't he? In 40 years, I'd never given him reason to doubt me. I'd been the predictable one, the steady one, the one who never caused problems. That Barbara was gone. For the next week, I lived a double life. During the day, I was still Walter's supportive wife and the company's diligent office manager. I attended meetings, processed payroll, coordinated with our craftsmen, all while documenting exactly how essential my role was to daily operations. At night, I met with Samantha, building our case and preparing for the confrontation to come. I also began reaching out to key employees, our head craftsman who'd been with us for 30 years, our lead designer, our operations manager, feeling out who might stand with me when the truth came out. I discovered I had more allies than I'd realized. Many of them had seen through Walter's self-promotion over the years and recognized my hand in the company's success. "I always wondered why you let him take all the credit," our head craftsman told me over coffee. "Everyone in the workshop knows who really makes the decisions around here." His words were both validating and painful. How many others had seen, what I'd been blind to, that in trying to protect Walter's ego, I'd allowed him to diminish me. The hardest part was keeping my plans from Grace, my granddaughter. At 26, she was perceptive and fiercely protective of me. She'd never entirely warmed to Walter, sensing perhaps the imbalance in our relationship that I'd tried so hard to normalize. When she called that week, asking why I sounded different, I deflected with questions about her job and social life. "Grandma, you never avoid my questions," she said suspiciously. "Is Grandpa giving you trouble again?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I assured her. "I'm just busy with a big project at work." It wasn't entirely a lie. The day before the board meeting, Walter announced he was taking Heather on a business trip to New York. "We need to meet with those new investors," he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "We'll probably stay overnight." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Of course. I'll handle things here." As soon as he left, I called Samantha. "They're going to New York tonight. Should we move up the meeting?" Absolutely not, she replied firmly. Let them have their little trip. In fact, this works in our favor. They'll be caught completely off guard when they return tomorrow to find a board meeting already in progress. She was right, of course. This wasn't about catching Walter with Heather. It was about reclaiming my company and my dignity. Still, as I moved through our empty house that evening, I couldn't help but feel a profound sadness for what was ending. Not just my marriage. That had been over the moment I heard Walter disparage me to his assistant, but the life I had carefully constructed over 4 decades. I slept poorly that night, alone in the bed I'd shared with Walter for most of my adult life. By morning, though, the sadness had hardened into resolve. I dressed with particular care, choosing a tailored navy suit I rarely wore because Walter once commented it made me look too businesslike. I paired it with the pearl necklace my Uncle Thomas had given me when we started the company, a far more meaningful piece of jewelry than Walter's impersonal diamond. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Walter and Heather were due back from New York around 9:30, just enough time for them to come directly to the office, but not enough to start asking questions about why a meeting had been called without Walter's knowledge. I arrived at 9:00, calm settling over me as I reviewed my notes one final time. Our boardroom, Walter's pride and joy, with its gleaming mahogany table and leather chairs, would be the stage for the most important presentation of my life. By 9:45, the room had filled. Our 3 outside board members looked confused but intrigued by the unusual circumstances. Michael arrived last, his expression a mixture of annoyance and concern. "Mom, what's going on? Dad doesn't know anything about this meeting and he's on his way back from New York." "I know, Michael," I said calmly. "Please take your seat. I'll explain everything once everyone is here." He frowned but complied, taking his usual place at Walter's right hand. I remained standing at the head of the table, Walter's spot, aware of the raised eyebrows this generated. At precisely 10, Walter and Heather burst through the door, both looking flushed and discomposed. Walter's surprise quickly morphed into anger when he saw me standing at his place. "Barbara? What the hell is this? Who authorized this meeting?" He strode toward me, clearly expecting me to yield my position. I didn't move. "I called this meeting, Walter. As majority shareholder of Reynolds Custom Furniture, that is my right." The silence that followed was absolute. Walter froze mid-stride, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then rising fury. Michael half rose from his chair, mouth open in shock. Only Samantha, seated quietly in the corner, seemed unsurprised, watching the scene unfold with professional detachment. "What are you talking about?" Walter finally managed, his voice unnaturally high. "You're not the majority shareholder. I am." In response, I nodded to Samantha, who distributed folders to everyone at the table. "If you'll all turn to page 1, I said, amazed at how steady my voice remained. "You'll see the original incorporation documents for Reynolds Custom Furniture, dated June 1982. You'll note that Barbara Reynolds, that's me, is listed as owning 67% of the company's shares, with Walter Reynolds owning 33%. Walter snatched his folder, rifling through the pages with trembling hands. "This is impossible. This must be some kind of forgery." He looked up, his face red with outrage. "Is this a joke, Barbara?" "No joke," I replied. "Turn to pages 3 through 7. Those document the additional share acquisitions I've made over the years, reinvesting my portion of the profits while you spent yours on boats and cars. My current ownership stands at 72%. Michael was staring at me as if he'd never seen me before. "Mom, is this true? You own the company?" I met my son's bewildered gaze with compassion, but without wavering. "Yes, Michael. I've always owned the controlling interest in Reynolds Custom Furniture. Your father and I built this company together, but legally, the majority has always been mine." Walter found his voice again, louder now, edged with panic. "This has to be a mistake. I made all the decisions. I built this company from nothing. Did you? I asked quietly. Who managed our finances during the recession of '08 so that we didn't have to lay off a single craftsman? Who negotiated the lease on our second showroom at half the asking price? Who developed the apprenticeship program that's now the backbone of our production capability? I looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes in turn. I did those things. I've been making the strategic decisions for this company since its inception, while allowing Walter to be the public face. That arrangement worked for us for many years, but circumstances have changed. Heather had backed toward the door, clearly, realizing she'd gotten entangled in something far more complicated than she'd bargained for. Walter noticed her retreat and barked, "Heather, don't you dare leave. We need to fight this." This coup. I shook my head. This isn't a coup, Walter. It's simply a clarification of what has always been the truth. I'm not pushing you out of the company. I'm just taking my rightful place at its head. And why now? Walter demanded, desperation creeping into his tone. After 40 years, why this? This ambush? I looked directly into Walter's eyes as I answered his question. Why now? Because yesterday I overheard you telling Heather that I'm nothing more than a bookkeeper who wouldn't understand business. Because after 40 years of marriage, you're planning to leave me for your assistant while dismissing everything I've contributed to our success. The boardroom fell silent. Michael's gaze shifted from me to his father, comprehension dawning on his face. The outside board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly understanding they were witnessing not just a business dispute, but a marital implosion. Walter's face drained of color. You were spying on me? I came home early and overheard. You, I corrected. But that's hardly the point, is it? The point is that you've been living with a fundamental misunderstanding about who owns this company and who has been making the decisions that led to its success. Walter looked desperately at Michael. Son, you can't let her do this. This company is your inheritance, your future. Before Michael could respond, I cut in. Reynolds Custom Furniture will still be Michael's inheritance, Walter. My shares will eventually pass to him, as was always the plan. The only difference is that now everyone will know the truth about who built this company. Walter slammed his fist on the table. This is ridiculous. I'm the face of this company. I'm the one who meets with clients, who represents us at trade shows. No one even knows who you are in this industry. His words stung, but only because they contained a kernel of truth. I had allowed myself to remain invisible, working behind the scenes while Walter took the spotlight. That had been my choice, made decades ago when I thought a happy marriage meant putting my husband's ego before my own recognition. You're right, I acknowledged. I've been content to let you be the public face of Reynolds while I handled the substance of our business. That was my mistake, and I'm correcting it now. I turned to address the entire board. I've prepared a presentation outlining our current financial position and my vision for the company's future direction. If you'll all turn to page 8 in your folders. This is outrageous, Walter interrupted, his voice rising dangerously. I'm not sitting through this farce. These documents are obviously forged. I'll have my lawyers, Mr. Reynolds. Samantha spoke for the first time, her tone calm but authoritative. I've personally verified all the documentation presented today. The ownership structure Ms. Reynolds has outlined is legally binding and has been in place since the company's incorporation. You are welcome to consult your own legal counsel, but I assure you they will confirm what I'm telling you. Walter glared at her. And who the hell are you? Samantha Torres, legal counsel for Ms. Reynolds, she replied smoothly. And by extension, for Reynolds Custom Furniture, given that Ms. Reynolds is the controlling shareholder. Walter's breathing had grown ragged, his face flushed with anger or perhaps panic. Heather had managed to edge her way to a chair in the corner, looking as if she desperately wished to be anywhere else. Dad, Michael finally spoke, his voice strained. Maybe we should hear Mom out. Walter whirled on him. You're taking her side? After everything I've taught you about this business? Michael flinched but held his ground. I'm not taking sides. I'm trying to understand what's happening. If these documents are legitimate. They are, I assured him gently. Walter looked from Michael to me, then to the board members who were watching the drama unfold with varying degrees of discomfort and fascination. Something in him seemed to deflate suddenly, as if the reality of his situation was finally sinking in. Fine, he said, dropping heavily into a chair, not his usual place at the head of the table, which I still occupied. Let's hear this. Presentation. I nodded, grateful for the momentary de-escalation. As I was saying, page 8 outlines our current financial position. As you can see, we're in excellent shape overall, with strong cash reserves and minimal debt. Our third quarter sales exceeded projections by 12%, largely due to the new contemporary line that I developed with our design team. Walter's head snapped up. That you developed? I approved that line. You signed off on it, I corrected, after I brought it to you fully conceptualized, with pricing, material sourcing, and production timelines already worked out. I continued through my presentation, outlining our market position, upcoming opportunities, and my vision for expansion into the West Coast market. Throughout, Walter sat in stony silence, occasionally shaking his head or making a dismissive noise. The other board members asked thoughtful questions, some directing them to me for the first time ever, rather than automatically deferring to Walter. As I concluded, I addressed the elephant in the room. I recognize that this revelation changes the dynamic of our leadership structure. I want to assure everyone that I'm not proposing any hasty changes to our operations. Walter has been the public face of Reynolds for decades, and that doesn't need to change overnight. What will change is that I will now be acknowledged as the majority owner and primary decision-maker for strategic direction. I paused, making sure to meet Walter's gaze directly. Walter, your sales and client relationship skills remain valuable to this company. I hope you'll choose to continue in that capacity. His laugh was bitter. How generous of you, Barbara. You stage a coup and then offer me a position in my own company. Our company, I corrected. And this isn't a coup. It's simply an acknowledgement of the actual power structure that has been in place since 1982. The meeting continued for another hour, with discussions of practical next steps and assurances to the outside board members that this revelation wouldn't disrupt our operations or financial stability. Throughout, Walter remained largely silent, his initial fury having calcified into a cold, hard resentment. As the meeting concluded and people began filing out, Michael approached me, his expression troubled. Mom, can we talk? Privately? I nodded, relieved that he at least wanted to hear me out. Of course, let's use my office. Walter watched us go, making no move to follow or intervene. The last glimpse I had of him, he was sitting alone at the boardroom table, staring at the documents that had shattered his version of reality. My office had always been practical rather than impressive, a reflection of my behind-the-scenes role in the company. As Michael settled into the chair across from my desk, I was suddenly self-conscious about the modest space compared to Walter's corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture. Why didn't you ever tell me? Michael asked without preamble. All these years I thought Dad was. I mean, he always took credit for everything. The business decisions, the growth strategies, even the designs sometimes. I sighed, choosing my words carefully. Your father and I had an arrangement that worked for us at the time. He liked being seen as the business genius, and I was raised to believe that a good wife supports her husband's image, even at her own expense. It was a different era, Michael. But you let me believe it too, he said, a note of accusation creeping into his tone. I've been working here for 15 years, and you never once hinted that you were the majority owner. You let me go to Dad for everything: approvals, decisions, mentorship. I felt a pang of regret. He was right, of course. In my efforts to protect Walter's ego, I'd inadvertently helped perpetuate a false narrative for my son as well. You're right, and I'm sorry for that, I said sincerely. I should have been more honest with you, especially once you joined the company. But habits formed over decades are hard to break. And truthfully, I thought you preferred going to your father. You two always seemed to speak the same language when it came to business. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Walter's that it made my heart ache. Because he was the one who taught me about it. Or at least I thought. He was. He looked at me with new eyes, reassessing. So all those times when Dad changed his mind suddenly about some business decision, he was probably repeating what I had suggested to him privately, I confirmed. Walter and I would discuss things at home, and then he would announce the decision at work as if it were his own. And you were okay with that? Michael sounded incredulous. At the time, yes. It seemed like a small price to pay for a harmonious marriage. I gave a small, rueful smile. In retrospect, perhaps I should have demanded more recognition. But that wasn't how I was raised. Michael was quiet for a moment, processing. And what Dad said about leaving you for Heather, is that true? I nodded, the hurt still fresh despite everything else that had happened. I overheard them discussing it. That was what prompted me to finally take this step. Jesus, Mom. Michael looked genuinely distressed. I had no idea. I mean, I knew Dad could be difficult, but I never thought he'd. People can surprise you, I said softly. Sometimes not in good ways. So what happens now? With the company, I mean. Now we move forward with transparency. I'll take a more visible role in leadership, though I don't intend to push your father out unless that's what he chooses. The company can benefit from both our strengths, provided he can accept the new reality. Michael looked skeptical. You know, Dad, his pride won't let him stay if he's not in charge. That's his choice to make, I said firmly. I won't diminish myself any longer to protect his ego. Michael nodded slowly, a new respect dawning in his eyes. I've never heard you talk like this before. I've never felt free to speak my mind before, I admitted. It's liberating. The conversation with Michael left me emotionally drained, but hopeful. At least he was willing to listen, to try to understand my perspective. Walter, as I soon discovered, was not nearly so receptive. When I returned home that evening, I found him packing a suitcase, his movements angry and jerky. So you're leaving, I said from the doorway of our bedroom. He didn't look up. Did you expect me to stay after that humiliation? You made me look like a fool in front of the entire board, in front of our son. You humiliated yourself, Walter, when you dismissed 40 years of my contributions and planned to leave me for your assistant. He finally turned to face me, his expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been shame. You could have confronted me privately. We could have discussed the company ownership, come to some arrangement. Instead, you ambushed me in public. Would you have listened in private? I challenged. Or would you have dismissed me as you've done countless times before when I've tried to claim credit for my work? Walter had no answer for that. He returned to his packing, shoving clothes haphazardly into the suitcase. Where will you go? I asked, surprised by how calm I felt watching my husband of 40 years prepare to walk out. To the Lake Harmony house, he muttered. At least that's still mine. I didn't correct him, though technically the lake house was also in my name. Another piece of advice from Uncle Thomas about keeping assets protected. Some battles weren't worth fighting yet. And Heather? I couldn't help asking. Will she be joining you? Walter's movements faltered. She's reconsidering her position. I wasn't surprised. Heather had signed up for an affair with the CEO of a successful company, not a public scandal with a man whose business acumen had just been revealed as largely mythical. "I'm sorry it's ending this way," I said, and I meant it. 40 years. Together couldn't be erased by one betrayal, no matter how painful. But I'm not sorry for finally standing up for myself. Walter zipped his suitcase closed with a vicious tug. "Is that what this is about? Standing up for yourself? Or is it about punishing me?" I considered the question seriously. "It's about truth, Walter. The truth of who built Reynolds Custom Furniture and the truth of our marriage. I played small for decades to make you feel big. I won't do it anymore." He hefted the suitcase off the bed, his movements stiff with suppressed emotion. "I built that company, Barbara. Whatever paperwork you've dug up, whatever legal tricks you're playing, I built it with my sweat and my ideas." "You truly believe that, don't you?" I marveled at his capacity for self-deception. "After everything that was presented today, you still can't acknowledge my role." "Your role? You were the supportive wife. That was your role." His words dripped with condescension, "And you played it well until today." Something in me snapped at his dismissal. "Get out, Walter. Just get out. Take your delusions with you and go." He looked momentarily startled by my vehemence, then his face hardened. Without another word, he brushed past me and headed downstairs. Moments later, I heard the front door slam, followed by the sound of his car starting and driving away. I stood in our bedroom, my bedroom now, feeling suddenly adrift. For 40 years, my identity had been inextricably linked with Walter's. Even as I'd secretly guided our company, I'd defined myself primarily as his wife, his support system, the woman behind the man. Now I was just Barbara, a 61-year-old woman with a successful business and an empty house. I sat on the edge of the bed, half expecting to break down in tears. Instead, I felt an odd lightness, as if a weight I'd carried for decades had finally been lifted. I could breathe more deeply, think more clearly. The pain was there, of course it was, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of possibility. For the first time in my adult life, I could make decisions solely based on what I wanted, not on what would please Walter or maintain the delicate balance of our marriage. The realization was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Grace. Of course she would have heard something by now. News traveled fast in family businesses. "Grandma?" Her voice was concerned. "Dad just called me. Something about you and Grandpa having a huge fight at work? Are you okay?" I smiled at her immediate concern for my well-being. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually. It's a long story, but the short version is that your grandfather and I are separating, and I'm taking a more active leadership role in the company." "Separating?" Grace gasped. "What happened? Did he do something? Do you need me to come over?" "Actually," I said, surprising myself, "I would love your company. There's a lot I need to tell you, and I'd rather do it in person." "I'm on my way," she said without hesitation. "I'll bring wine. Sounds like we're going to need it." Grace arrived less than an hour later, armed with 2 bottles of Cabernet and a fierce protective energy that warmed my heart. As we settled in the living room with our glasses, I told her everything. The original structuring of the company, Walter's betrayal with Heather, the confrontation in the boardroom. Unlike Michael, Grace showed no surprise at the revelation of my business acumen. "Of course you're the brains behind Reynolds," she said matter-of-factly. "I figured that out years ago." "You did?" I was genuinely surprised. "How?" She shrugged. "Grandpa talks big, but whenever there was an actual problem to solve, everyone came to you. Plus, you understand the craftsmanship in a way he never did. Remember when you took me to the workshop when I was little? You knew every step of the process, every tool, every technique. Grandpa couldn't tell a mortise from a tenon. I laughed, touched by her observation. You were paying attention. Always, she affirmed, refilling our glasses. So what's your plan now? Are you going to sell the company and move to Bali or something equally dramatic? No, I said thoughtfully. Reynolds is my life's work. I don't want to walk away from it. I want to lead it openly, to expand it in ways Walter always resisted. I took a sip of wine, warming to my theme. He never wanted to risk our comfortable position, but I've had ideas for years about moving into new markets, exploring e-commerce more aggressively, maybe even opening a design school to train the next generation of craftspeople. Grace's eyes lit up. That sounds amazing, Grandma. You could totally transform the business. I could, I agreed, feeling a surge of excitement. For the first time, I can implement my vision without having to filter it through Walter's ego. And what about personally? Grace asked gently. Are you going to be okay living here alone? This house has a lot of memories. I glanced around the living room, seeing it with new eyes. The furniture we'd collected over decades, the photos on the walls marking milestones of our shared life, the spaces that held both happy memories and painful ones. I'm not sure, I admitted. This house was always more Walter's choice than mine. He wanted the prestigious address, the showcase for entertaining clients. I smiled ruefully. I might want something different now. Like what? I considered the question. Something smaller, maybe, more modern, closer to the workshop so I can be more involved in the day-to-day creation process. You should do it, Grace said decisively. Sell this place. Buy something that reflects who you are now, not who you were as Walter's wife. Her straightforward support was refreshing after Michael's more conflicted reaction. But then, Grace was of a different generation, one that hadn't been raised with the same expectations about women subordinating their ambitions to their husbands. Maybe I will, I said, the idea taking root. A fresh start. We talked late into the night, the conversation flowing easily from business strategies to personal reflections. Grace was full of ideas for how Reynolds could expand its reach, particularly to younger customers who valued craftsmanship but wanted contemporary designs. You should let me help with our social media presence, she suggested enthusiastically. We could showcase the workshop, the craftsmanship process, the stories behind our pieces. People love that authenticity. I'd like that, I said sincerely. You have a perspective I don't, and it would be wonderful to work with you. As Grace prepared to leave, I'd insisted she take an Uber rather than drive after the wine. She hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, Grandma. It takes courage to stand up for yourself after all these years. Her words stayed with me as I readied for bed, alone in the house for the first time in decades. It had taken courage, yes, but also desperation. I wondered if I would have found the strength to assert myself if I hadn't overheard Walter's plan to leave me. Would I have continued indefinitely in my supporting role, content to let him take credit for my work? The thought troubled me as I slipped between the sheets. Had I needed the threat of abandonment to finally value myself? Or had the seeds of this transformation been germinating for years, just waiting for the right moment to break through? Either way, I was embarking on a new chapter. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself not dreading the challenges ahead, but eagerly anticipating them. Tomorrow would be my first day as the acknowledged leader of Reynolds Custom Furniture. My first day as Barbara Reynolds, businesswoman, not just Walter's wife. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, feeling strangely energized despite the emotional turmoil of the previous day. After 40 years of adapting my morning routine to Walter's preferences, making his coffee just the way he liked it, preparing a hearty breakfast to fuel his important workday, I found myself at loose ends. I could make whatever I wanted for breakfast. I could linger over my coffee, reading the news on my tablet instead of listening to Walter's running commentary on world events. I could play music, my music, not the classical pieces Walter insisted were the only appropriate background for. Morning reflection. Small freedoms, perhaps, but they felt monumental after decades of unconscious accommodation. By the time I arrived at the office, word had spread of yesterday's dramatic board meeting. I could feel eyes on me as I walked through the building, hear the whispers that stopped abruptly when I came into view. Rather than intimidating me, the attention was oddly empowering. For once, I wasn't invisible. My first stop was Michael's office. I found him already at his desk, reviewing sales reports with an intensity that suggested he was avoiding thinking about larger issues. "Good morning," I said, hovering in his doorway. "Do you have a moment?" He looked up, his expression guarded but not hostile. "Sure, Mom. Come in." I took the seat across from him, struck by how formal it felt to be meeting with my son in this context. I wanted to check in after yesterday. I know it was a lot to process. Michael set down his reports with a sigh. It was unexpected. I talked to Dad last night. "And?" I prompted when he didn't continue. "He's angry, hurt, convinced. You've somehow manipulated the situation." Michael rubbed his temples. "He wants me to side with him, to potentially challenge the ownership documentation." My heart sank, though I wasn't surprised. "And what do you think?" "I think?" Michael chose his words carefully. "I think the evidence you presented is clear. I've asked our regular company attorney to review everything independently, and..." He confirmed what your lawyer said. "You are the majority shareholder, and have been since the beginning." Relief washed over me. "Thank you for being objective about this." I'm still trying to reconcile the mother I've known all my life with. "The businesswoman who orchestrated yesterday's revelation," he admitted. "It's a lot." "I understand. I'm still reconciling those two versions of myself as well." I leaned forward, wanting him to understand. "Michael, I never intended to mislead you. The dynamic between your father and me was established long before you were born, and by the time you joined the company, it seemed fixed in stone." He nodded slowly. "I get that. But moving forward, I need transparency. No more hidden power structures or behind-the-scenes maneuvering. If you're running this company, then run it openly." "That's exactly my intention," I assured him, starting with a company-wide meeting this afternoon to clarify the leadership structure. Michael's eyebrows shot up. "You're not wasting any time." "I've wasted 40 years, I said simply. I don't intend to waste any more. As I prepared for the afternoon meeting, I received an unexpected visitor, Samantha Torres, my newly retained attorney. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, appearing in my office doorway. "I wanted to check in after yesterday's excitement and discuss next steps." "Not interrupting at all," I assured her, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "In fact, your timing is perfect. I'm announcing the leadership changes to the entire company this afternoon." Samantha nodded approvingly. "Good. Swift, decisive action is best in situations like this. Prevents rumors and uncertainty from festering." She set her briefcase on her lap and extracted a folder. "I've prepared some additional documents for you to review. Updated corporate bylaws that reflect your position more accurately, and some thoughts on restructuring the board to better support your vision." I accepted the folder, impressed by her efficiency. "You work quickly." "That's my job," she said with a small smile, "especially when dealing with sensitive family situations." I glanced through the documents, noting with approval the clear language establishing my authority. "These look excellent, but I'm curious about something. When I first approached you, you didn't seem surprised by my situation. A woman who secretly owned her company while letting her husband take credit. Have you seen this before?" Samantha's expression softened slightly. "More often than you might think, especially with companies founded in the 70s and 80s. Women of your generation often had the business acumen, but felt they needed a male face for their companies to be taken seriously. And yes, sometimes that male face was their husband. And these women eventually asserted themselves, like I'm doing. Some did, she acknowledged. Others never found the courage or the right moment. They went to their graves with their contributions unrecognized. She gave me an appraising look. You should be proud of yourself, Barbara. What you're doing isn't easy. Her validation touched me more than I expected. Thank you, Samantha. That means a lot. After she left, I spent the remaining time before the company meeting reviewing key projects and financial reports. I wanted to approach this new phase with a comprehensive understanding of our current position, not just rely on the knowledge I'd accumulated over years of quiet influence. At 3 sharp, I entered our largest conference room, which was already filled, to capacity with employees from every department. Some looked curious, others anxious, all attentive as I took my place at the front of the room. Thank you all for coming on short notice, I began, surprised at how steady my voice sounded despite my racing heart. I've called this meeting to clarify some changes in the leadership structure of Reynolds Custom Furniture. I proceeded to explain in simple, straightforward terms that I was the majority shareholder and would be taking a more active, visible role in leading the company. I didn't dwell on the past or make accusations against Walter. This wasn't about airing dirty laundry, but about establishing a clear path forward. Many of you have worked with me for years, I continued, making eye contact with our senior craftspeople and longtime staff. You know my commitment to quality, to innovation, and to taking care of the Reynolds family, and that includes all of you. That commitment hasn't changed. What has changed is that I'll now be making decisions openly rather than behind the scenes. I outlined my vision for the company's future, expanding our market reach, investing in new technology while preserving traditional craftsmanship, developing a more robust online presence. Change can be unsettling, I acknowledged, but I believe these shifts will strengthen Reynolds Custom Furniture and create new opportunities for everyone here. My door is open for questions, concerns, or ideas. This company has always thrived because of the collective talent in this room, and that won't change under my leadership. As I opened the floor for questions, I braced myself for skepticism or resistance. Instead, I was met with thoughtful inquiries about specific projects and strategies. Our head craftsman, Gerald, who had been with us for over 30 years, stood up toward the end of the session. Mrs. Reynolds, he said, his weathered face creased in a smile. I just want to say that some of us have known for years who really kept this place running. It's about time everyone else figured it out too. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and I felt a lump form in my throat. Thank you, Gerald. That means more than you know. The meeting concluded on a positive note, with many employees stopping to offer support or congratulations as they filed out. Not everyone was enthusiastic, of course. Walter had his loyalists, particularly in the sales department, but the overall reception was far more favorable than I dared hope. As I gathered my notes, Michael approached. That went well, he observed. You've clearly earned more respect around here than I realized. People notice more than we give them credit for, I replied. I'm just grateful for the support. He hesitated, then said, I got a text from Dad during the meeting. He wants to meet with both of us tomorrow. Says he has a proposal. I raised an eyebrow. Did he elaborate? No, but he seemed calmer than yesterday. Said he's been thinking things through. I considered this. Walter, thinking things through could mean anything from a genuine attempt at reconciliation to a calculated strategy to regain control. Either way, I would need to be prepared. Tell him we'll meet at 10 Kamir tomorrow, here at the office. I decided. Neutral ground, professional setting. Michael nodded and stepped away to send the response. As I watched him, I realized that despite the upheaval, he was adapting to the new reality with remarkable resilience. Perhaps he had more of me in him than either of us had recognized. That night, as I prepared dinner for one in my suddenly too large kitchen, my phone rang. It was Walter. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided that avoidance served no purpose. "Hello, Walter." "Barbara." His voice was controlled, lacking yesterday's raw anger. "Michael says you've agreed to meet tomorrow." "Yes, at the office, 10 Naus." "Fine." He paused, then asked, "Did you have to call a company-wide meeting today? Was that necessary?" I sighed. "The leadership change affects everyone, Walter. Better they hear it directly from me than through rumors." "And how exactly did you explain my absence? Did you tell them all that I'm an adulterous fraud?" "I said nothing of the sort," I replied evenly. "I kept it professional and focused on the future, not the past. I have no interest in publicly humiliating you, despite what you seem to think." He made a skeptical noise, but didn't press the point. "Tomorrow, then. 10 by." "Tomorrow?" I agreed, and ended the call. As I ate my solitary dinner, I wondered what Walter's proposal might entail. Whatever it was, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never again diminish myself for his comfort or convenience. That Barbara was gone, transformed by the catalyst of his betrayal into someone who finally valued her own worth. The Barbara who would meet with Walter tomorrow was the majority owner of Reynolds Custom Furniture, a woman with 4 decades of business experience and a clear vision for the future. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't afraid to own that power. I arrived at the office early the next morning, wanting time to prepare mentally for my meeting with Walter. The familiar routine of reviewing overnight emails and checking production schedules had a calming effect, grounding me in the business that had been my life's work, even if few had recognized it. At precisely 9:45, there was a knock at my office door. I looked up, expecting to see my assistant, but instead found Heather Collins standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "May I speak with you for a moment?" I was genuinely surprised to see her. After the boardroom confrontation, I'd assumed she would resign immediately, or at least avoid any direct contact with me. "Of course, Heather. Please come in." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, studying her as she entered. She looked tired, her typically perfect appearance slightly disheveled, as if she'd dressed in haste. She sat stiffly, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I wanted to speak with you before the meeting with Mr. Reynolds, to explain myself." "That's not necessary," I said, not unkindly. "Your personal relationship with Walter is your business." "No, it is necessary," she insisted, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "You need to know that Walter misrepresented his situation to me. He told me you two had an understanding, that you'd been living separate lives for years while maintaining appearances for the sake of the company." I couldn't help the short, disbelieving laugh that escaped me. "An understanding? We most certainly did not." "I realize that now," Heather said, her cheeks flushing. "Just as I realize he misrepresented his role in the company. He led me to believe he built Reynolds from nothing, that he was the sole decision-maker." She shook her head. "I feel like such a fool." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. Walter had a talent for constructing narratives that cast him in the most favorable light, regardless of their relation to reality. "Walter has always been skilled at crafting the story he wants others to believe," I said carefully. "You're not the first to be taken in by it." "I've submitted my resignation," she said abruptly. "It's on your desk somewhere, in that stack of papers. I can't stay here after everything." I nodded, understanding her decision. The dynamics would be impossible, regardless of how professional everyone tried to be. "I'll process it today," I assured her. "Will you be looking for another position in the industry?" I'd be willing to provide a reference focusing on your work performance, which has been exemplary. Surprise flickered across her face. You'd do that? After what happened between me and Walter? Your professional capabilities shouldn't be dismissed because of personal complications, I said. And contrary to what Walter may have told you, I don't believe in burning bridges unnecessarily. Heather's posture relaxed slightly. Thank you. That's unexpectedly generous. She hesitated, then added, You should know that Walter is planning to fight for control of the company. He spent most of yesterday with his lawyer, looking for loopholes in your ownership arrangement. This didn't surprise me, but I appreciated the warning. Did his lawyer find any? Not that I heard, but Walter is determined. He feels humiliated, and he's not handling it well. I considered this information. Thank you for telling me, Heather. I'll be prepared. She rose to leave, then paused. Mrs. Reynolds, Barbara, I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for the affair, but for underestimating you. Walter always painted you as this sweet, simple housewife who helped out at the office. I should have seen through that characterization. No simple housewife builds a company like Reynolds. With that, she left, closing the door quietly behind her. I sat for a moment, absorbing our conversation. It was strange to feel almost grateful to the woman who'd been having an affair with my husband, but her warning about Walter's state of mind was valuable intelligence. At 9:58, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Dad's here. We're in the conference room. I gathered my notes and made my way to the small conference room we used for client meetings, neutral territory, as I'd requested. Through the glass walls, I could see Walter and Michael already seated, Walter drumming his fingers impatiently on the tabletop. As I entered, both men stood. Walter looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes, and yesterday's stubble shadowing his jaw. Michael's expression was guarded, his loyalty clearly torn between his parents. Barbara, Walter acknowledged stiffly as I took my seat. Walter, I replied, keeping my tone even. You wanted to meet. I'm here. He cleared his throat, shooting a glance at Michael before beginning. I've had time to think about the situation. I've consulted with my attorney about the ownership documents you presented. And? I prompted when he paused. And they appear to be legally binding, he admitted, the words clearly costing him. However, my attorney pointed out that while you may own the majority of shares, I've been the operational head of Reynolds for 4 decades. My name, my reputation, my relationships are inextricably linked with this company. I waited, sensing he was building to his proposal. I'm prepared to accept the reality of your majority ownership, Walter continued, in exchange for maintaining my position as CEO, with full operational control. You keep your financial stake, but the day-to-day running of the company remains in my hands. I glanced at Michael, who was carefully maintaining a neutral expression. This was clearly the compromise Walter had discussed with him beforehand. That's an interesting proposal, I said carefully. But it doesn't address the fundamental issue. You've been taking credit for my work for 40 years. Why would I agree to continue that arrangement now that the truth is out? Walter's jaw tightened. Because it's what's best for the company. The clients know me. The industry knows me. If you suddenly step in and push me aside, it creates instability, raises questions. Questions that can be answered truthfully, I countered. Reynolds Custom Furniture has always been a partnership, with both of us contributing our strengths. The only difference now is that my contributions will be acknowledged openly. Mom's right, Dad, Michael interjected, surprising me. The company's reputation is built on quality and craftsmanship, not just on your personal relationships. Those values won't change with Mom taking a more visible role. Walter's expression hardened at what he clearly perceived as betrayal from our son. So you're both against me now? After everything I've done for this company? For this family? "This isn't about being against you, Walter," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's about honesty and recognition. I'm willing to work with you as co-leaders of Reynolds, with clearly defined roles that respect both our contributions. But I will not go back to the shadows." "Co-leaders?" Walter scoffed. "That's not how businesses succeed. There needs to be one clear leader, one vision." "I agree," I said simply. "And as majority shareholder, that leader is me. But I'm offering you a partnership out of respect for your skills and our history together. The alternative is that you step down entirely." Walter stared at me, disbelief etched on his face. "You would push me out of my own company?" "Our company," I corrected gently. "And I'm offering you a path to stay involved. The choice is yours." The silence that followed was heavy with 40 years of unspoken truths. Walter looked from me to Michael, perhaps hoping for support, but finding none. "I need time to consider this proposal," he said finally, rising from his chair. "In the meantime, I'll be working from home. Michael can relay anything urgent." Before either of us could respond, he strode from the room, his shoulders rigid, with anger and wounded pride. Michael sighed once the door closed behind his father. That went about as well as expected. "He's hurt and angry," I acknowledged. But offering him a partnership was the right thing to do, both professionally and personally. "Do you think he'll accept it?" I considered the question, thinking about the man I'd been married to for 4 decades. Honestly, I don't know. Walter's pride has always been his driving force. Working alongside me as an acknowledged equal, rather than as the sole leader, would require a fundamental shift in how he sees himself. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "For what it's worth, I think your offer was fair. More than fair, considering." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable referencing his father's affair. "Thank you, Michael. That means a lot to me." I gathered my notes, ready to return to the day's work. "Let's give your father some time to process. In the meantime, we have a company to run." The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and adjustments to my new public role. Walter remained absent from the office, communicating only through Michael or terse emails about specific projects. His silence was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. What was he planning in his self-imposed isolation? I found myself working longer hours than ever, determined to prove that my leadership wouldn't disrupt our operations or damage client relationships. Each evening, I returned to an empty house that still felt uncomfortably like Walter's domain rather than my own. On Friday evening, as I was preparing to finally leave the office after a particularly grueling day, Grace appeared in my doorway, a determined expression on her face. "Grandma, you need a break," she announced without preamble. "I'm taking you to dinner, and then we're going house hunting tomorrow." I blinked in surprise. "House hunting?" "Grace, I haven't decided to sell the house yet. Maybe not consciously," she replied. "But you hate going home every night. I can hear it in your voice when we talk. That house is Grandpa's space, not yours. You need somewhere that feels like your own." Her perception was startling, but accurate. Each night, I found myself delaying my return home, finding excuses to work later or stop for unnecessary errands. The house that had been my domain for decades now felt alien, filled with Walter's preferences and his absence. "You may be right," I admitted. "But house hunting seems premature. Walter and I haven't even discussed divorce yet, let alone division of assets." Grace waved this away with the casual disregard of youth. "You don't have to buy anything tomorrow. Just look. Get a sense of what you might want for yourself if you weren't considering Grandpa's preferences." Put that way, it sounded like exactly what I needed, a glimpse of a future that was truly my own, not a compromise. "All right," I agreed, gathering my things. "Dinner and house hunting it is." Grace beamed, looking so much like her father had at the same age that it made my heart ache. "Perfect. I've already made reservations at that new Mediterranean place downtown. Over dinner, Grace skillfully steered the conversation away from company matters and Walter, instead asking about my preferences and interests in a way few people ever had. "If you could live anywhere, where would it be?" she asked as we shared a plate of honeyed baklava. "Somewhere with more light," I said immediately, surprising myself with the certainty of the answer. The house in Maple Grove is so traditional, small, windows, formal spaces. I've always loved natural light. "What about style? Traditional, modern, something in between?" I considered the question. More contemporary than where I am now, certainly. Clean lines, open spaces, but still warm, not minimalist. Grace nodded, taking notes on her phone. Location? Still suburban? Or would you consider downtown Philadelphia? Or maybe somewhere completely different? The question gave me pause. I'd lived in suburbs my entire adult life. The choice dictated by Walter's preference for prestigious addresses and my own desire to provide a stable environment for Michael growing up. But now? I'm not sure, I admitted. I've never really considered the alternatives. "That's what tomorrow is for," Grace said with a smile. "No pressure, no commitments, just possibilities." The idea of possibilities, of choices made solely for myself, was intoxicating. As we finished our meal and Grace drove me home, I felt lighter than I had in weeks, despite the ongoing uncertainty about my marriage and the company. That night, I slept better than I had since Walter left, my dreams filled with sun-drenched rooms and new beginnings. The next morning, Grace arrived promptly at 9, armed with a list of properties from a realtor friend and a large travel mug of coffee for each of us. "I told Elise we're just browsing today, getting a feel for the market," she explained as we set out. "She's arranged for us to see 6 places across different neighborhoods." The first property was a sleek downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Philadelphia skyline. The space was beautiful but felt too impersonal for my taste, more like a hotel suite than a home. The second, a renovated brownstone in a historic district, had more character but still felt wrong somehow, too formal and constrained by its historical features. By the fourth property, a modern, architect-designed home on the outskirts of the city, I was beginning to feel discouraged. Each place had appealing elements, but none felt like me. Or perhaps I simply didn't know what me looked like in terms of a home, after decades of deferring to Walter's preferences. The fifth property changed everything. It was a contemporary house set on a quiet street in a small arts community about 30 minutes from Philadelphia. As we pulled up, I was immediately drawn to its understated elegance, simple lines, natural materials, large windows that connected the interior to a surprisingly private garden. Inside, the space opened up dramatically, with a central living area that flowed seamlessly into a kitchen designed for someone who actually cooked, not just for show. A wall of windows looked out onto mature trees, creating a sense of being in nature despite the suburban setting. "This one," I said softly as we stood in the sun-drenched living room. "This feels right." Grace squeezed my arm, a knowing smile on her face. "I thought you might like this one. The community has a lot of artists and creatives, people who value craftsmanship. There's even a small woodworking collective nearby." I wandered through the rest of the house, each room reinforcing my initial impression. The primary bedroom was serene and simple, with windows overlooking a small pond at the rear of the property. A second bedroom had been converted into a home office with built-in bookshelves and a window seat. Most surprising was the lower level, which had been finished as a workshop, not the sterile home gym or media room typical of suburban homes, but an actual workspace with sturdy benches, good light, and ventilation. "The current owner is a jewelry designer," our realtor explained, noting my interest. "She created this studio space for her work." I ran my hand along one of the benches, imagining it repurposed for small woodworking projects. something I'd loved in my youth but had abandoned as my responsibilities to Walter and the company consumed my time. It's perfect, I admitted, both excited and suddenly terrified by how strongly I was responding to this house. But I'm not in a position to make any decisions yet. My husband and I trailed off, unsure how to explain the complicated situation. Grandma's just exploring options right now, Grace interjected smoothly. But we'd love to keep this property on our radar. Could you let us know if there's any serious interest from other buyers? The realtor agreed readily, and we completed our tour with the final property, a contemporary townhouse that would have been my top choice if I hadn't seen the artist's home. As we drove back toward Maple Grove, I found myself oscillating between excitement about the possibilities I'd seen and anxiety about the practical and emotional complexities of actually making such a change. What if I'm being impulsive? I wondered aloud. 40 years in one house, one marriage, and suddenly I'm contemplating such drastic changes. Grace considered this thoughtfully. Is it really sudden, Grandma? Or is it something that's been building for years, maybe decades, and you're only now allowing yourself to acknowledge it? Her question struck uncomfortably close to the truth. How many times over the years had I swallowed my preferences, my desires, my very self to maintain peace with Walter? The house was merely a symbol of a much larger pattern. You may be right, I admitted. But there are practical considerations. Walter and I haven't even discussed separation terms, let alone divorce. The house in Maple Grove is one of our largest shared assets. True, Grace acknowledged. But knowledge is power, right? Now you know what you want, what feels right for you. That's valuable information for whatever comes next. As we pulled into the driveway of the house that no longer felt like home, I noticed Walter's car parked on the street. My stomach tightened with apprehension. He's here, I said unnecessarily. Grace's expression hardened. Do you want me to stay? I don't mind facing him down if you need backup. I smiled at her protective instinct. No, sweetheart. This conversation is overdue and I need to handle it myself. But thank you for today. It was illuminating. Grace hugged me tightly before I got out of the car. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all, okay? I nodded, watching her drive away before squaring my shoulders and heading inside. Walter was in the kitchen, making coffee as if he'd never left. He looked better than he had at our office meeting, clean-shaven, wearing fresh clothes, less haunted around the eyes. Barbara, he acknowledged, not looking up from the coffee maker. Where were you? Out with Grace, I replied simply, setting my purse on the counter. I didn't expect to see you here. It's still my house, he pointed out, a defensive edge to his voice. Of course. I moved to the refrigerator, suddenly aware that I was hungry after a day of house hunting. Have you eaten? I was going to make a sandwich. Walter looked surprised by the mundane question. No, I haven't. A sandwich would be fine. The normality of making lunch together in our kitchen after everything that had happened was surreal, but also oddly comforting. Some patterns are hard to break, even when the relationship underlying them has fundamentally changed. As we sat at the kitchen island with our simple meal, Walter finally spoke about what had brought him back. I've been thinking about your proposal, the partnership. I kept my expression neutral, waiting for him to continue. I don't like it, he admitted bluntly. The idea of being seen as your equal rather than the leader of Reynolds goes against everything I've built my identity around for 40 years. I understand that, I acknowledged, but the alternative is stepping away completely. Walter set down his sandwich, his appetite apparently gone. Is there no third option? No room for negotiation? What did you have in mind? I asked, genuinely curious. A phase transition, he suggested. I remain CEO for one more year, with you openly acknowledged as the majority owner but taking on the role of chairperson. We present it to clients and staff as a planned succession strategy rather than a revelation. I considered his proposal. It had merit from a business perspective. A gradual transition would indeed be less disruptive than an abrupt change in leadership. But it still felt like a compromise that benefited Walter more than me. "And after the year?" I asked. "I step back to an advisory role or retire completely. Your choice. You take full control of operations as well as ownership." "What about public acknowledgement of my contributions over the years? Of the fact that I've been making strategic decisions all along?" Walter winced but nodded. "We can craft a narrative that honors your role without completely undermining mine. Something that acknowledges our partnership while preserving both our dignities." It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was more than I'd expected Walter to concede. The businessman in me recognized the practical advantages of his proposal. The woman in me still craved immediate and complete recognition. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "From a business perspective, it makes sense. But I need to think about whether it's enough for me personally." Walter accepted this with a nod, then shifted uncomfortably. "There's also the matter of us, our marriage." The direct reference to our personal relationship caught me off guard. We'd been discussing the company as business partners, temporarily, setting aside the fact that we were also husband and wife, or had been until recently. "What about our marriage?" I asked cautiously. Walter met my eyes directly for the first time since I'd entered the house. "Is it over, Barbara? Have you decided that already?" The vulnerability in his question was unexpected. I'd been so focused on reclaiming my professional identity that I hadn't fully processed the end of my marriage, or considered whether it had to end. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Your affair with Heather, the things you said about me, they hurt deeply. Walter, I'm not sure that's something we can come back from." "The affair was a mistake," he said quietly. "A middle-aged man's foolish attempt to feel important, desired. As for what I said," he had the grace to look ashamed. "I was wrong. Seeing you these past few days, watching how seamlessly you've stepped into leadership. I was blind not to recognize your capabilities before." His words should have been gratifying, a validation I'd sought for decades. Instead, they underscored how completely he'd failed to see me throughout our marriage. "It shouldn't have taken this crisis for you to recognize my worth, Walter," I said, a lifetime of unacknowledged hurt in my voice. "All those years I was right beside you, contributing just as much to our success, but you never saw it. You saw what you wanted to see, a supportive wife who handled the details while you took the credit." Walter flinched but didn't deny it. "You're right. I didn't see you clearly. Maybe I didn't want to. It was easier to believe I was solely responsible for our success than to acknowledge how much I relied on you." His admission was surprising in its honesty. Walter rarely acknowledged his flaws or mistakes, preferring to rewrite history in a way that cast him in a more favorable light. "Where does that leave us?" I asked, genuinely uncertain. Walter ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times over our decades together. "I don't know. Can 40 years of marriage be salvaged after something like this? Do you even want to try?" It was the crucial question. Did I want to try? Part of me, the part that had spent the day imagining a new life in that sun-filled artist's home, wanted to make a clean break. But another part recognized the complex web of history, family, and yes, love, that still connected me to Walter. "I need time," I said finally. "Time to figure out who I am outside of being your wife. Time to lead Reynolds openly and see if we can work together under this new arrangement. I'm not saying no to reconciliation, but I'm not saying yes either." Walter nodded slowly, accepting my ambivalence. "That's fair. More than fair given what I've done. He hesitated, then added, Where will you stay while you're figuring things out? Here? The lake house? The question brought me back to the homes I'd visited that day, particularly the artist's house that had spoken to me so strongly. I'm not sure yet, I replied truthfully. But I think some physical separation would be good for both of us. Right now. Give us space to reflect. I'll stay at the lake house for now, Walter offered, surprising me again with his lack of argument. You keep the house here until you decide what you want. His consideration was unexpected and touching. Perhaps this crisis had forced him to re-examine not just my role in our business, but his behavior in our marriage as well. Thank you, I said simply. We finished our sandwiches in a silence that wasn't exactly comfortable, but wasn't hostile, either. A truce between two people trying to navigate uncharted territory after decades of established patterns. As Walter prepared to leave, gathering the few additional items he'd come for, he paused at the kitchen doorway. Barbara? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for Heather, but for not seeing you, truly seeing you, all these years. The apology caught in my throat, unexpected tears pricking at my eyes. Thank you for saying that, Walter. After he left, I moved through the quiet house, seeing it with new eyes after my day of house hunting. This space had never really reflected my preferences or personality, just as my role at Reynolds had been shaped to accommodate Walter's ego rather than showcase my talents. Yet, as I touched familiar objects, photographs of our life together, furniture we'd selected, or more accurately, that Walter had selected and I had accepted, I felt the weight of our shared history. 40 years couldn't be erased or discounted, regardless of the path forward. That night, I called Grace to recount my conversation with Walter. He actually apologized? She asked, clearly skeptical. Grandpa doesn't apologize. Ever. It surprised me too, I admitted. But he seemed sincere. This situation has shaken him deeply. So what are you going to do? About the company proposal and everything else? I sighed, still uncertain despite hours of reflection. His business proposal makes practical sense. A gradual transition would be less disruptive for clients and staff. As for our marriage, I honestly don't know, Grace. Part of me wants to start fresh, to discover who Barbara Reynolds is when she's not defined by being Walter's wife. But another part recognizes that there's still something between us, despite everything. You don't have to decide everything tonight, Grace reminded me gently. Take your time, see how the business partnership goes, and maybe look into short-term rentals if you want some space without committing to buying a new house right away. Her practical suggestion was exactly what I needed, a middle path between staying in Walter's house and making a permanent decision about our future. That's a good idea, I agreed. It would give me time and space to think clearly. And Grandma? Whatever you decide, I'm on your side. Always. Her unwavering support warmed me. I know, sweetheart, and it means the world to me. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet living room, considering my options. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but for the first time in decades, I was making decisions based on my own needs and desires, not just as Walter's wife or Michael's mother or the silent partner in our business. The uncertainty was frightening, yes, but also exhilarating. At 61, I was finally discovering who Barbara Reynolds truly was, what she wanted, what she valued. The catalyst had been painful. Walter's betrayal, his dismissal of my contributions. But perhaps it had been necessary to break patterns established over 4 decades. Tomorrow, I would return to the office as the acknowledged leader of Reynolds Custom Furniture. I would consider Walter's proposal for a phased transition and decide if it satisfied my need for recognition. I would look into short-term rentals, places where I could begin to discover my preferences and desires separated from Walter's influence. The future held more questions than answers, but for the first time in years, I was eager to discover what lay ahead, unconstrained by the limitations I'd accepted for so long. On Monday morning, I walked into Reynolds Custom Furniture with newfound clarity. The weekend's conversations with Walter and Grace had crystallized something important within me. While I was still uncertain about my marriage, I was absolutely certain about one thing. I would never again diminish my contributions to protect someone else's ego. I'd spent Sunday evening drafting a counter-proposal to Walter's succession plan. His suggestion of a 1-year transition period made business sense, but his framing still positioned him as the leader graciously making way for me, rather than acknowledging the truth that I had always been the primary strategic force behind Reynolds. At precisely 10 o'clock, Walter appeared in my doorway. He looked better than he had on Saturday, more rested, dressed in the tailored navy suit that had always been my favorite on him. "Barbara?" he greeted me with a nod. "Do you have time to discuss my proposal?" "I do. I've prepared a counter-proposal." "As well." I handed him the document I'd prepared, watching as he scanned the contents, his expression shifting from curiosity to surprise to a flash of annoyance. "Effective immediately, you step down as CEO and assume the title of President of Client Relations," he read aloud. "I become CEO and retain my position as majority shareholder and chairperson of the board." He looked up, his blue eyes sharp. "This isn't a counter-proposal, Barbara. It's a complete reversal of roles." "It's an accurate reflection of our actual contributions to the company," I corrected. "You excel at client relationships and sales. I'm not disputing that. But the strategic direction, the financial management, the product development, that's always been my domain, even if you presented it as yours to the outside world." Walter leaned back, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between admiration and resentment. "You're not the same woman I left 2 weeks ago." "I'm exactly the same woman," I corrected him. "I just no longer feel obligated to make myself smaller to make you feel bigger." A flash of pain crossed his face at my blunt assessment. "Was that really how you felt all these years? That you were making yourself smaller for my benefit?" "Yes, Walter, that's exactly how it was. Every time I let you present my ideas as your own, every time I worked through the night on a proposal that you casually delivered to clients as if you'd created it, I was diminishing myself to protect your image as the brilliant businessman." Walter flinched, unable to deny the truth. "I need time to consider this proposal," he said finally. "I'll get back to you by Wednesday at the latest." After he left, I sat back in my chair, emotionally drained by the exchange but also curiously energized. I had stated my needs clearly, without apology or qualification, something I'd rarely done in our 40 years together. That evening, I viewed 2 furnished apartments, neither of which felt quite right. As I drove home, feeling slightly discouraged, my phone rang, the realtor who had shown us the artist's house. "Mrs. Reynolds, I wanted to let you know that we've received an offer on the property you toured last weekend. If you're still interested, this would be the time to act." My heart raced at the news. The artist's house, with its wonderful light, its seamless flow between indoor and outdoor spaces, its workshop that had immediately felt like a place where I could rediscover dormant creative impulses, had lingered in my thoughts all week. "Thank you for letting me know," I said carefully, "but as I mentioned during the tour, my situation is complicated at the moment." After we hung up, I sat in my car, wrestling with conflicting emotions. The practical part of me insisted that buying a house now, before Walter and I had even discussed separation terms, was premature. But another part, the part that had been suffocated for decades by practical considerations, longed for that sun-filled space that had felt so right. On impulse, I called Grace. "Grandma, how were the apartments?" She answered enthusiastically. "Neither was quite right," I admitted, "but I just got a call about the artist's house. Someone's made an offer." "Oh no, that was perfect for you." What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I confessed. "It feels too soon, too complicated given that Walter and I haven't sorted anything out yet. But the thought of losing it—" I trailed off, surprised by the depth of my emotional response. "Grandma," Grace said seriously, "when was the last time you made a major decision based solely on what you wanted, not what was practical or what would make Grandpa happy?" The question stopped me short. When, indeed? Perhaps never. Even my decision to confront Walter had been forced by his betrayal, not initiated by my own desires. "It's been a while," I acknowledged softly. "Then maybe it's time," Grace suggested. "You've spent your whole life being practical. Maybe this is the universe giving you a chance to choose something just because it feels right." Her perspective was both terrifying and liberating. What would it feel like to make a decision based on desire rather than duty? With sudden clarity, I realized what I needed to do. I called the realtor back. "I'd like to make a counteroffer on the house," I said without preamble. "Can we meet tonight to discuss terms?" 2 hours later, I signed the offer papers in a quiet coffee shop. The realtor was surprised but delighted by my decisiveness, particularly when I offered to make a substantial down payment. As I drove home afterward, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Whether or not my offer was accepted, I had made a decision based solely on what I wanted. Not what was expected, not what would please Walter. My phone buzzed with a text from Walter. "I've reviewed your counter-proposal. Can we meet tomorrow?" "To discuss?" "Preferably not at the office." "Noon at Riverside Cafe?" I suggested, naming a quiet restaurant near our office. His response came quickly. "See you there." The next day, I arrived at the cafe to find Walter already seated at a corner table. He rose as I approached, the automatic courtesy ingrained over decades of marriage. "I've given your counter-proposal a lot of thought," he began after we'd ordered. "It's not what I wanted, but I understand why you're insisting on these terms." I waited, sensing there was more to come. "I'm prepared to accept the role of President of Client Relations," he continued, surprising me with his lack of argument. "And the press release acknowledging your historical role in the company's success." He paused, then added quietly, "You deserve that recognition, Barbara. I should have given it to you years ago." His acceptance caught me off guard. "Thank you, Walter. I appreciate your willingness to move forward on these terms." "There's something else I want to discuss," he said, his fingers drumming lightly on the tablecloth. "Something personal." Walter met my eyes directly, a vulnerability in his gaze that I rarely saw. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks, about us, about the patterns we've fallen into. I don't like what I see, Barbara. I don't like who I've been to you." I remained silent, allowing him space to continue. The affair with Heather was inexcusable, but it was just a symptom of something deeper. I've been so focused on maintaining this image of myself as the brilliant businessman that I couldn't acknowledge how much I depended on you. He took a deep breath. "I'm not asking for reconciliation, not yet. But I am asking for a chance to prove that I can change, that I can learn to truly see you and honor your contributions." "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked carefully. "Counseling for a start," he said. "Both individually and together, if you're willing. And I'd like to court you again, Barbara. Not push for an immediate reconciliation, but simply spend time with you outside of work. I'd like the chance to get to know the woman I've been married to for 40 years, but never fully appreciated." Before I could formulate a response, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from the realtor. I excused myself to take it in the restaurant's entryway. "Mrs. Reynolds? I have good news. The sellers have accepted your offer. We can move forward immediately with the paperwork." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Elation at having secured the house, anxiety about explaining this to Walter just as he was proposing reconciliation. When I returned to the table, Walter's curiosity was evident. "Important call?" he asked. I took a deep breath, deciding that honesty was the only viable path forward. "Yes, it was a realtor. I've made an offer on a house, and it's just been accepted." Walter's expression froze. "A house," he repeated slowly. "Not a rental, a purchase." "Yes," I confirmed. "It's smaller than our current home, more modern. It has wonderful light and a small workshop where I can explore creative projects I've been putting off for years." "I see." His voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the pain beneath. "So you've already decided about us?" "I've decided about where I need to live right now," I clarified. "The house represents something important to me, a space that reflects who I am, not who we've been together. I need that, regardless of what happens between us." He was silent for a long moment. "Does this mean you're not open to counseling, to the possibility of reconciliation?" "I'm open to counseling," I said carefully. "I think we both have things to work through. As for reconciliation, I'm not closing that door completely, but I'm also not making any promises. I need to discover who Barbara Reynolds is when she's not defined by being Walter's wife." He nodded, acceptance settling into his features despite the evident disappointment. "That's fair. More than fair, given everything." He managed a small smile. "Congratulations on the house. I hope it brings you the space and clarity you're seeking." His grace in the face of what must have felt like rejection touched me unexpectedly. This was not the Walter I'd known, the man who reacted to any perceived slight with defensive anger. This was someone new, or perhaps someone who had always been there beneath the layers of ego. As we parted outside the restaurant, Walter hesitated, then asked, "Would you still consider that dinner sometime? Not as husband and wife, just as two people with 4 decades of shared history trying to understand each other better." The request was made with such genuine humility that I found myself nodding. "Yes, I think I'd like that. Not immediately. I need to settle into the new house first. But soon." Relief flickered across his face. "Thank you, Barbara, for that, and for not giving up on me completely, even though you'd have every right to." The next 6 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. I closed on the house, working with a designer, to make it truly mine. At Reynolds, Walter and I settled into our new roles with surprising ease. The press release acknowledging my historic contributions generated significant industry attention, leading to a feature in a prestigious business magazine titled "The Woman Behind Reynolds, Barbara's Story Finally Told." Walter kept his word about counseling, seeing a therapist twice weekly and providing genuine insights during our occasional joint sessions. We had dinner once a week, sometimes discussing business, but more often exploring topics we'd never made. Time for during our marriage, art, philosophy, dreams deferred. On the day I finally moved into my new home, Grace helped me arrange the workshop, setting up the woodworking tools I'd purchased to reclaim the creative passion I'd abandoned decades earlier. "So, what happens now with you and Grandpa?" she asked as we sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "He's making real efforts to change, to understand how his behavior affected me all these years. And I'm discovering parts of myself I never knew existed, or forgot existed." "Are you happy, Grandma?" Grace asked, the question simple but profound. I considered it carefully, looking out at the garden I was planning, the workshop waiting for my first project, the life I was crafting on my own terms. "Yes," I realized with some surprise. "I am. Not in the uncomplicated way of youth, but in the deeper way that comes from finally being true to yourself, regardless of the outcome." Grace smiled, squeezing my hand. "That's all that matters then. The rest will work itself out, one way or another." Whether Walter and I would eventually reconcile or move forward separately remained uncertain. But one thing was absolutely clear. I would never again diminish myself for anyone. At 61, I had finally claimed my rightful place, in my company, in my relationships, and most importantly, in my own life. As I looked toward the horizon, alive with color and possibility, I felt not the ending of something precious, but the beginning of something even more valuable, a life authentically my own. 3 months after moving into my new home, I found myself in my workshop on a quiet Sunday morning. The space had quickly become my sanctuary, a place where I could reconnect with the creative passions I'd set aside decades ago. I was working on a small wooden jewelry box, carefully detailing the lid with an intricate floral pattern I'd designed myself. The morning light streamed through the large windows, illuminating the fine wood dust that floated in the air with each stroke of my carving tools. There was something meditative about the work, the focus it required, the satisfaction of seeing something beautiful emerge from my hands. These quiet hours in the workshop had become essential to my new life, a time when I felt most authentically myself. A knock at the door interrupted my concentration. Setting down my tools, I brushed the sawdust from my apron and went to answer it. To my surprise, Walter stood on the threshold, holding a small wrapped package. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice that still seemed foreign coming from him. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop this off." "Not at all," I assured him, genuinely pleased to see him. Our weekly dinners had continued, evolving into conversations that went deeper than anything we'd shared during our marriage. "Come in. I was just working on a project in the shop." Walter followed me inside, his eyes taking in the space that was so different from our Maple Grove home. Where that house had been traditional and formal, this one was open and light-filled, with simple, contemporary furnishings and artwork I'd chosen myself. "It suits you," he said quietly. "The house. I can see you in every corner of it." His observation touched me. "Thank you. It feels like home in a way I didn't expect. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." We settled in the kitchen, where the full-length windows offered a view of the small garden I'd started. The early summer flowers were beginning to bloom, adding splashes of color to the landscape. "Here," Walter said, sliding the package across the table. "I found this while going through some old files at the lake house. I thought you might want it." Curious, I unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound notebook I hadn't seen in years. Opening it, I recognized my own handwriting, sketches, notes, and design concepts for what would eventually become Reynolds Custom Furniture's first signature collection. "My old design journal," I murmured, running my fingers over the faded ink drawings. "I thought this was lost in the move to Maple Grove." "It was in a box of business records from when we first started," Walter explained. "I was organizing the storage room and came across it." He hesitated, then added, "I spent hours looking through it yesterday. The vision you had for Reynolds, even back then. It was remarkable, Barbara." Something in his voice made me look up. Walter was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite define. Regret, certainly, but also something like wonder. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head slightly, as if clearing a fog. "I was just thinking about how completely I misunderstood what was happening all those years. In my mind, I was the visionary, the one driving Reynolds forward while you were supporting me, helping with the details. But looking at that journal, seeing the depth of thought behind every design, every business strategy, he met my eyes directly. The company was always yours, wasn't it? In all the ways that truly mattered." His acknowledgement, so complete, so unequivocal, left me momentarily speechless. For 40 years, I had longed for Walter to see and value my contributions. Now, faced with his full recognition, I found myself unsure how to respond. "It was ours," I said finally. Different roles, different strengths. But yes, the strategic, vision, the design aesthetic, those came primarily from me. Walter nodded slowly. My therapist asked me last week why I needed to take credit for your work, why it wasn't enough to be successful together, why I had to be seen as the sole genius. He glanced down at his coffee cup, turning it slowly, between his hands. I've been thinking about it constantly since then. And? Have you found an answer? I was genuinely curious. The Walter I had known for most of our marriage would never have engaged in this kind of introspection. Partly, he admitted. My father, certainly. His constant criticism, his dismissal of anything I achieved. But that's not the whole story. He looked up, his gaze steady despite the discomfort evident in his expression. The truth is, Barbara, I was intimidated by you. By your intelligence, your creativity, your quiet confidence. Deep down, I knew you were the true talent behind Reynolds. Taking credit for your work was how I managed my fear that others would realize it too, that they'd see you were the essential one, not me. His candor stunned me. In 40 years of marriage, Walter had never been this vulnerable, this honest about his insecurities. The man sitting across from me seemed both familiar and entirely new. Still Walter, with his commanding presence and penetrating gaze, but without the defensive armor he'd worn for decades. I never wanted to diminish you, I said softly. I just wanted acknowledgement, partnership. I know that now, he nodded. But back then, any recognition of your contributions felt like it came at my expense. It was as if we were in a zero-sum game where your success meant my failure. He shook his head, regret etching lines around his eyes. What a waste. All those years we could have been true partners, celebrating each other's strengths instead of whatever it was we were doing. Something shifted inside me as I listened to Walter's words. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of release. The anger and resentment I'd carried for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a bittersweet understanding of how we had both been trapped in patterns that diminished us. It wasn't all a waste, I found myself saying. We built something significant, together, raised a wonderful son, created a legacy that will outlast us. That counts for something, despite the mistakes we made along the way. Walter's expression softened with evident relief. Thank you for saying that. I've been afraid that when you looked back on our marriage, all you'd see were the ways I failed you. The honesty of this conversation, so different from the careful dance of evasion and accommodation that had characterized our marriage, felt both disorienting and refreshing. For the first time, we were speaking to each other as equals, without the distorting filters of ego and expectation. Would you like to see what I'm working on? I asked, suddenly wanting to share this new part of my life with him. In the workshop? Walter's face brightened with genuine interest. I'd love that. Leading him to my workshop, I felt a momentary flutter of nervousness. This space was so personal, so emblematic of the independent life I was building. But as Walter moved carefully around the workbenches, examining my tools and the half-finished jewelry box with appreciative eyes, I realized I wasn't afraid of his judgment anymore. His opinion, once so central to my sense of worth, was now just one perspective among many, neither devastating if critical, nor essential if approving. This is beautiful work, Barbara, he said, running a finger along the carved pattern on the box lid. I had no idea you were so skilled with woodworking. Neither did I until recently, I admitted with a small laugh. I took some classes at the community college after I moved in. It's been therapeutic, creating something with my hands that has nothing to do with Reynolds or our history. Walter nodded thoughtfully. You seem different here. More, I don't know, present somehow. Less careful. His observation was surprisingly perceptive. I am different here, I acknowledged. For the first time in my adult life, I'm making choices based solely on what I want, what feels right to me. It's both terrifying and exhilarating. We spent the next hour in the workshop, Walter asking questions about my techniques and projects with genuine curiosity. As we talked, I found myself remembering what had drawn me to him all those years ago. His quick intelligence, his intensity, his capacity for complete focus on whatever captured his interest. These qualities had made him a formidable businessman. They also made him an engaging companion when not distorted by ego and insecurity. Eventually, we migrated back to the kitchen, where I prepared a simple lunch of soup and sandwiches. The conversation flowed easily, touching on business matters. Michael and Grace, books we'd recently read. It felt normal, comfortable, like two old friends catching up rather than estranged spouses navigating the aftermath of betrayal. As Walter prepared to leave, he paused at the door, his expression turning serious again. "Barbara, there's something I need to ask you. Something I've been thinking about a lot lately." The sudden shift in his tone made my heart quicken with apprehension. "What is it? Are you happier now? Without me?" The question was direct, vulnerable in its simplicity. I considered it carefully, knowing Walter deserved an honest answer. "I'm different now, more myself, less concerned with meeting others' expectations. There's a freedom in that brings its own kind of happiness." I met his gaze steadily. "But that doesn't mean I was never happy with you, Walter. We had good years, moments of real connection and joy. But not enough of them," he said quietly. "Not what you deserved." "Perhaps not," I acknowledged. "But I played my part in that too. I chose to stay silent, to accommodate, to put your needs first. That wasn't all you're doing." Walter shook his head slightly. "You're being generous. Too generous, probably." "Not generous. Just honest. Our marriage wasn't a villain-victim story, Walter. It was more complicated than that." He considered this, then asked, "Do you think we could have had something different? If I had been able to see you clearly from the beginning, to value your contributions, to be a true partner?" The question pierced me with its poignancy. What might our life together have been if Walter had been capable of the insight and humility he was showing now? If I had demanded recognition rather than accepting invisibility? "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think we could have had something. Richer, deeper, but speculating about what might have been doesn't serve either of us now. We can only move forward from where we are." Walter nodded, accepting this wisdom even as disappointment flickered across his face. "You're right, of course." He hesitated, then added, "I should go. Thank you for today, Barbara. For showing me your work, for the conversation. It means more than you know." After he left, I returned to my workshop, but found myself unable to focus on the jewelry box. Instead, I sat at my workbench, turning Walter's questions over in my mind. Was I happier now? Could we have had something different? The truth was, I didn't know the answer to either question with certainty. What I did know was that the woman I was becoming, independent, creative, unapologetic about her needs and desires, was someone I respected, someone who had always existed within me, but had been obscured by decades of compromise and self-effacement. The realization hit me with a clarity that was almost physical. Regardless of what happened with Walter, regardless of whether we ultimately reconciled or went our separate ways, I would never again surrender this hard-won selfhood. I could share my life with Walter or someone else, but I would never again define myself primarily through that relationship. This, then, was the true gift of these tumultuous months. Not just the professional recognition that had come with claiming my rightful place at Reynolds, not just the personal space created by my new home, but this fundamental shift in how I understood myself and my worth. I had spent 40 years believing at some deep level that my value was derived from my usefulness to others, as Walter's wife, as Michael's mother, as the invisible force keeping Reynolds successful. Now, at 61, I finally understood that my worth was inherent, not contingent on what I provided to anyone else. The insight wasn't entirely comfortable. There was a certain safety in defining oneself through roles and relationships, a clear structure and purpose that self-definition didn't automatically provide. Who was Barbara Reynolds when not viewed through the lens of her connection to others? What did she want from the remaining chapters of her life? These were questions I was only beginning to explore. But even with its uncertainties, this new understanding felt like solid ground beneath my feet after decades of shifting sand. For the first time, I was making choices from a place of self-knowledge rather than self-abnegation. Whether those choices ultimately led me back to Walter or along an entirely different path, they would be authentically mine. That evening, I called Grace to share my day with Walter and the insights it had prompted. "It sounds like he's really changing," she observed after I recounted our conversation. "Do you think there's a chance for you two?" "Maybe," I said, surprised by how neutral I felt about the possibility. "He's certainly doing the work, engaging in the kind of self-reflection I never thought him capable of. But reconciliation isn't my focus right now." "What is your focus?" Grace asked curiously. I smiled, looking around at the home I had created for myself, thinking of the projects waiting in my workshop, the business strategies I was implementing at Reynolds without having to filter them through Walter's ego. "Learning who I am," I said simply. "Not as a wife or mother or silent partner, but as Barbara. Just Barbara. That's journey enough for now." Grace's approval was audible in her voice. "I'm proud of you, Grandma. Not many people have the courage to start over at 61. "I'm not starting over exactly," I corrected her gently. "More like continuing from a new vantage point. Everything that came before, my marriage, motherhood, my work at Reynolds, it all brought me here. I wouldn't erase any of it, even the painful parts, but I'm writing the next chapters with different priorities." After we hung up, I returned to the workshop, determined to finish the detail work on the jewelry box before bed. As I carved, my mind continued to process the day's revelations. Walter had seen me, truly seen me, perhaps for the first time in our marriage. The recognition I had craved for so long had finally come, along with a genuine apology for the years of invisibility. Yet strangely, now that I had received this acknowledgement, it seemed less crucial than it once had. I was glad for Walter's growth, for his willingness to face hard truths about himself and our marriage. But my sense of worth no longer depended on his validation or anyone else's. This, I realized as I put the finishing touches on the jewelry box, was true independence. Not the absence of connection or the rejection of my past, but the freedom to choose my path forward based on my own values and desires, unburdened by the need for external approval. Whatever happened next, reconciliation with Walter, a completely new relationship, or a life focused on my own interests and passions, would be my choice, made from a position of strength rather than accommodation. For the first time in my adult life, I was the author of my own story, not a supporting character in someone else's. As I closed up the workshop and prepared for bed, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The future remained unwritten, full of possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine even a few months ago. But whatever it held, I would face it as the woman I was always meant to be. Confident, creative, and finally, completely visible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.